Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Easy English Spark channel. I'm so happy to have you here today. In today's video, we're diving into something that's going to supercharge your English listening and speaking skills, help you build confidence, and make you feel comfortable using English in your everyday life. Whether it's using English at home, practicing with friends, or learning through fun activities like movies and letters, we've got plenty of tips to help you speak more fluently. Let's get started and light up your English journey right from the comfort of your own home. Chapter 1. The First Encounter with English. It was a bright and warm afternoon, one of those days where the sunlight dances on the leaves and the world feels full of possibilities. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was just 7 years old, sitting in the living room of our modest home. My mother had just returned from the market, carrying a small portable radio. She placed it on the table, dusting it off before switching it on. As the radio hummed to life, I heard a voice I had never heard before. It was clear, confident, but strange. The words were foreign to me, completely unfamiliar. They didn't sound like anything I had ever heard in my everyday life. It was a language I couldn't understand, yet there was something about the rhythm and melody of it that immediately captivated me. The voice filled our home, and the sounds seemed to float in the air like a new kind of music. It was English. I was mesmerized. The way the words flowed and the different sounds they made intrigued me. I didn't understand what the person on the radio was saying, but somehow I felt like I was listening to something important, something that carried meaning even if I couldn't decipher it just yet. It was like discovering a whole new world, a world where words sounded like music, and each word had its own story to tell. I turned to my mother, who had noticed my wide eyes and curious expression. She smiled at me, her eyes sparkling with understanding. "This," she said, "is English. It's a very important language." I looked at her, waiting for more, my mind racing with questions. How was this language different from what I already knew? Why was it so important? My mother could see my curiosity, and so she went on to explain. She told me that English was spoken by millions of people all around the world. She told me how it was the language of business, of science, of communication between people from different countries. She told me how learning English could open up many doors for me. At that moment, the idea of learning this foreign language seemed like a grand adventure, a journey that I had never imagined before. It wasn't just a language. It was a key to a wider world, I could feel the excitement building up inside me. I wanted to understand what those words meant. I wanted to be part of that world, to speak the same language as the people on the radio. I wasn't sure how, but in that instant, I decided that I would learn English. I would understand it, speak it, and make it a part of my life. From that moment on, I started paying attention to the English words I heard on the radio, in songs, and in movies. I would ask my mother what certain words meant, and she would patiently explain. Sometimes she would help me repeat simple words just to get the hang of the sounds. That day, sitting in the living room with my mother and the radio playing softly in the background, marked the beginning of my journey with the English language. It was a day that I would never forget, because it was the day I first realized the power of language, how it could connect people across the world, how it could shape the future, and how it could open up doors that I had never even dreamed of. It was the first step in what would become a lifelong adventure in learning, and I couldn't wait to take the next step. Chapter 2. My first English class. A few weeks after I first heard English on the radio, something incredible happened. My parents decided to enroll me in an English class. I still remember the excitement and nervousness that rushed through me the day they told me. My heart skipped a beat at the thought of actually learning this language that had fascinated me so much. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew one thing for sure. I was eager to get started. On the day of my first class, I was full of anticipation. I remember wearing my best clothes, a little nervous but also incredibly excited. I had heard my parents talk about how important it was to learn English, and now I was about to take my very first step. As we walked to the school, I could feel my nerves starting to build up, but my curiosity was stronger than the fear. This was my chance to finally understand the words I had been hearing. When we arrived at the classroom, I was greeted by the sight of a colorful space filled with posters, pictures, and charts. There was a sense of warmth and friendliness in the room that immediately made me feel a little better. I wasn't the only new student. There were a few other kids there, all looking just as nervous as I was. But there was one thing that stood out to me: the teacher. Her name was Mrs. Williams. She had a gentle smile, and her eyes seemed to sparkle with kindness. I could tell from the way she greeted us that she loved teaching, and it made me feel comfortable right away. She welcomed us with open arms, making us feel like we were part of something special. I noticed that her voice had a soothing tone, and it was easy to listen to her. She had this way of making everything seem fun and exciting, and I was already starting to feel like I was in the right place. As we sat down, Mrs. Williams introduced herself and began to explain what we would be learning. Today, we're going to start with the basics, she said. We're going to learn the alphabet. I couldn't help but feel a little nervous. How hard could it be to learn something as simple as the alphabet? But at the same time, I was eager. This was the first real step I was taking to understand English, and I was determined to make the most of it. Mrs. Williams brought out a big, colorful chart that had all the letters of the alphabet. Each letter had a picture next to it. She pointed to the letter A and said, "A is for apple." Then she held up a bright red apple for us to see. We all repeated after her, "A is for apple." It was a simple start, but it felt amazing to say those words out loud. Each letter was paired with a picture, making it easier to remember. "B is for ball," she said, showing us a bouncy ball, and we repeated after her. "B is for ball." One by one we went through the alphabet, repeating each letter and its corresponding word. I couldn't believe how quickly I was picking it up. Each time I said the words, they started to feel more natural, like a rhythm I could follow. As we moved through the letters, Mrs. Williams encouraged us to make the sounds clearly and loudly. "Don't be shy," she said with a warm smile. "English is fun when you speak with confidence." By the end of the lesson, I had learned how to recite the entire alphabet. It felt like a huge achievement, and I was so proud of myself. I remember thinking that it wasn't just the alphabet I had learned. It was the beginning of a whole new world opening up before me. For the first time, I truly felt like I was on my way to understanding English, and that made me feel excited about all the lessons to come. But there was something even more special about that first class. It wasn't just about learning the alphabet. It was about the way Mrs. Williams made the whole experience feel like an adventure. Every word she said made me want to learn more. The classroom wasn't just a place for studying. It was a place where we could play with language, discover new words, and open up our minds to new possibilities. When the class ended, Mrs. Williams gave us each a sticker for completing our first lesson. I felt so proud, not just because of the sticker, but because I had taken the first real step toward learning English. I knew that this was just the beginning. There would be many more classes, more words, more challenges, but in that moment, I felt like I could conquer anything. As we left the classroom, my heart was full of excitement. I couldn't wait to go home and tell my parents everything I had learned. I knew that this was just the start of an amazing journey, and I was ready to take on the next step, one letter at a time. Chapter 3: Discovering New Words. After my first English class, I couldn't wait to go back. The excitement of learning something new every day made me look forward to the lessons with eagerness. But what really caught my attention was not just the alphabet or basic sentences. It was the incredible world of words that began to unfold before me. Each new word felt like a tiny discovery, and with each one I could feel myself growing closer to understanding this fascinating language. It didn't take long before Mrs. Williams introduced us to more words. At first, the words were simple: cat, dog, ball, sun. But with every word, something magical happened. I began to realize that each word was like a key to understanding the world around me. When Mrs. Williams said, cat, I would picture a fluffy, white cat playing in the yard. When she said, dog, I imagined the big golden retriever that lived down the street, always wagging its tail. Each word made me think of something real and familiar, yet it was all in English. One of the most exciting parts of our lessons was when Mrs. Williams introduced us to new words through games. She would write words on the board and then ask us to draw them. For example, when she wrote apple, I grabbed my colored pencils and drew a bright red apple. It wasn't just about writing words on paper. It was about connecting those words to images in my mind. Every time I drew, I felt a deeper connection to the word, and the word itself felt more meaningful. We also played a fun game called Word Search. Mrs. Williams would give us a list of words, and we had to find them hidden in a jumble of letters. The words we searched for weren't just random. They were things we had seen around us: tree, book, school, house. The game didn't just teach us how to spell the words. It helped us understand them better. It made learning feel less like a lesson and more like a treasure hunt. As the days went by, Mrs. Williams started introducing us to different categories of words. We learned words for animals: lion, elephant, zebra, giraffe. Each new animal felt like a new friend. I remember feeling a sense of wonder when I learned the word giraffe. The word itself was as tall as the animal, and I could almost imagine the giraffe stretching its long neck to reach the top of a tree. We also learned words for colors, and that was one of my favorites: red, blue, green, yellow. Each word had its own special feeling. The word blue, for example, always reminded me of the calm sky above, while yellow made me think of the warmth of the sun. I started noticing how these colors appeared everywhere around me. The world felt more vibrant, more alive, now that I could name all the colors in English. As we learned more words, Mrs. Williams brought in a large picture dictionary. It was an old, worn-out book with colorful pictures of everything imaginable. There were pictures of flowers, food, animals, objects around the house, and even landscapes from different countries. The pictures were so vivid that I could almost smell the flowers or hear the sounds of the animals. Every time we opened the dictionary, it felt like stepping into a new world. One day, Mrs. Williams asked us to bring in a favorite item from home. We could show it to the class and then describe it in English. I brought in my favorite toy, a small teddy bear. When I held it up, I felt a sense of pride as I said, "This is my teddy bear. It is soft and brown. It has a red scarf around its neck." I was so excited to describe it in English that I forgot about being shy. I wanted to show everyone how much I had learned, and with each sentence, I felt more confident. Around this time, I also started noticing new words on signs, in books, and even in advertisements. Words like store, shop, food, drink. They were everywhere. It felt like the world was opening up to me in a way it hadn't before. I started paying attention to how these words were used in sentences, and I began to recognize them when I heard them on the radio or in TV shows. But the word that stuck with me the most during this time was butterfly. One afternoon, as we were learning about insects, Mrs. Williams showed us a picture of a butterfly. The wings were so delicate and colorful, with shades of orange, yellow, and black. Butterfly, she said, is the word we use for this beautiful insect. I immediately loved the sound of the word. It seemed to float in the air, just like the butterfly's wings. I kept repeating it to myself. Butterfly. It felt magical, almost like the word could capture the beauty of the insect itself. That day, I went home and asked my mother if we could go outside to find butterflies. I spent hours in the garden looking for them. Every time I saw one, I couldn't help but say the word out loud, butterfly. I felt like I had unlocked a new way to understand the world. Words were no longer just sounds. They were keys to discovering beauty in the everyday things around me. As the weeks passed, I learned more words than I could count. I began to realize that every new word I learned opened up a new part of the world to me. Each word was a building block in my understanding of English, and each word helped me feel more connected to the people around me, to the stories I was hearing, and to the adventures that awaited me. But what I loved the most was that learning new words didn't just stop with the classroom. I started using them everywhere, at home, in the park, at the store. When I went to the grocery store with my parents, I would point to items and say their names in English. Banana, tomato, cheese. It made me feel proud every time I used a new word correctly. Learning new words became a habit, and I realized that the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. Words weren't just tools for communication anymore. They were like friends, waiting for me to discover them, waiting for me to understand them and use them to connect with the world around me. Each new word was like a stepping stone on my journey to learning English. I couldn't wait to discover what words would come next. And I knew that with every word, I was getting closer to the world I had first heard on that radio. A world where English opened the door to endless possibilities. Chapter 4. Overcoming the Fear of Speaking. As I continued my English lessons, I began to realize that understanding words and speaking them were two very different things. It wasn't enough just to know the vocabulary. I had learned many words, and I could recognize them when I saw them or heard them, but speaking them out loud, especially in front of others, was a whole different challenge. At first, I was terrified of speaking in English. Even though I could understand the words and know their meanings, there was a voice inside me that said, "What if I make a mistake?" Or, "What if people laugh at me?" I had never felt so self-conscious about something in my life. My heart would race, and my palms would sweat whenever it was my turn to speak in class. The thought of saying the wrong word or mispronouncing something was paralyzing. But I wasn't alone. Many of my classmates shared the same fear. We would all sit quietly, looking down at our books, waiting for someone else to volunteer to speak. The silence in the room sometimes felt suffocating, as though the fear of making mistakes was hanging in the air, making it hard to breathe. It wasn't until one day that everything started to change. That day, Mrs. Williams noticed the hesitation in our voices. She could see that we were all struggling with the same fear. So, instead of just pushing us to speak, she took a different approach. She smiled warmly and said, "You know, it's okay to be nervous. We all make mistakes, and that's how we learn. What's important is that you try. Each time you speak, you'll get a little bit better." Her words hit me deeply. I had always feared making mistakes, but she was telling us that mistakes weren't something to be ashamed of. They were part of the learning process. That was a turning point for me. Mrs. Williams wasn't going to judge us for our mistakes. Instead, she saw them as opportunities to grow. And if she wasn't afraid of mistakes, maybe I didn't have to be either. From that moment on, I made a conscious decision to try speaking, no matter how uncomfortable it made me feel. I knew I couldn't let my fear control me. The next time Mrs. Williams asked us to speak, I took a deep breath and raised my hand. My voice was shaky at first, but I said the sentence I had practiced. My name is Selena. It felt awkward, like my mouth was moving in ways it wasn't used to, but I did it. I spoke. And you know what happened? No one laughed. In fact, Mrs. Williams smiled and praised me. Great job, Selena. You're doing wonderfully. Her words were like a warm hug to my confidence. It wasn't perfect, but I had taken the first step, and that was enough. Over the next few weeks, I slowly started to build my speaking skills. Every time Mrs. Williams asked us to speak, I tried a little harder. At first, it was just simple sentences like, I like cats, or I have a book. But the more I spoke, the more comfortable I became. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about communicating and connecting with others. There were still times when I would freeze up, my mind blanking in the middle of a sentence, or when I would stumble over a word. But Mrs. Williams always reminded us to keep going. She would say, "It's not about being perfect, it's about making progress." I learned that mistakes weren't failures, they were stepping stones, helping me grow and become better. Each time I made a mistake, I would laugh at myself, shrug it off, and try again. One of the most helpful exercises we did in class was practicing with a partner. Mrs. Williams would pair us up, and we would take turns asking and answering simple questions. My partner was a shy boy named Sam. At first, we both struggled to speak, our sentences short and hesitant. But we soon found that it was easier to speak to each other because we both understood the fear of making mistakes. We encouraged each other, and over time, we became more confident. We practiced sentences like, "What is your favorite color?" and "Do you like dogs?" The more we practiced together, the easier it became. We both started to feel less afraid of speaking, and we both began to speak more fluently. Mrs. Williams also encouraged us to speak outside of class. She suggested that we practice English with our families at home. I was nervous about this at first. Speaking English in front of my family seemed daunting. What if they didn't understand me? What if I made too many mistakes? But I decided to take the leap. One evening, I sat at the dinner table and decided to try speaking in English. I told my parents, "I am eating dinner," and they smiled, encouraging me. "Good job, Selena," they said. That simple sentence, "I am eating dinner," was a small victory, but it meant the world to me. The more I practiced speaking at home, the more I became comfortable. I started using English in my daily life, even for the smallest things. If I needed something, I would say, "Please pass the salt," or "Can I have some water?" It felt strange at first, but it became more natural over time. My confidence grew even further when we started reading short stories in class. After reading a story, Mrs. Williams would ask us to summarize it in English. At first, I could only say a few simple sentences, but with each new story, my vocabulary expanded, and my speaking ability improved. The stories we read gave me new words and phrases to use, and I found that I could express myself more clearly. Over time, the fear of speaking English slowly faded away. I learned that the key to overcoming my fear was simply to practice, to make mistakes, and to keep going. Speaking English didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be honest, simple, and full of effort. Each time I spoke, I grew a little bit more confident, and each conversation made me more comfortable with expressing myself. Looking back, I realized that the fear I had was a normal part of the learning process. It wasn't something to run away from, it was something to embrace. Now, when I speak English, I don't worry about making mistakes anymore. I see them as opportunities to learn, to improve, and to grow. Every time I speak, I know I'm one step closer to fluency. And that makes all the fear worth it. Chapter 5. Embracing Reading. After overcoming my initial fear of speaking, I found that there was another aspect of learning English that was just as exciting, if not more so: reading. At first, reading in English felt like an entirely different challenge. I had mastered the basics, simple words and short sentences, but reading full stories seemed like a big leap. But as I continued my lessons with Mrs. Williams, I realized that reading was not just about understanding words on a page. It was a way to truly immerse myself in the language and explore new worlds, new ideas, and new perspectives. The first time Mrs. Williams mentioned reading in English, I was both curious and apprehensive. She told us that reading would not only help us build our vocabulary, but also improve our understanding of how English sentences were constructed. Reading helps you see how words come together to form ideas, she explained. It's like piecing together a puzzle. Once you have all the pieces, you can see the bigger picture. At first, Mrs. Williams gave us simple storybooks. They were small, with colorful pictures on every page. I remember the first book I picked up. It was a story about a cat named Tom, who went on little adventures in his neighborhood. The story was simple, the sentences short, and the vocabulary easy to understand. However, even though the book was easy, it felt like a new challenge. I couldn't just rush through it. I had to read slowly and carefully, making sure I understood every word. Each page was a new step toward my goal of becoming more fluent in English. In the beginning, I had to look up a lot of words. Sometimes, I could guess the meaning of a word from the context, but other times I had to ask Mrs. Williams or my parents what it meant. Every time I learned a new word, it felt like a small victory. The more I read, the more words I learned, and the easier it became to understand the story. It wasn't long before I started to feel more confident in my reading. I could look at a page of English words and not feel overwhelmed. Instead, I felt curious, eager to discover what came next. Reading in English started to open my eyes to the beauty of the language. I began to notice how different writers used words in unique ways to tell stories. The more I read, the more I wanted to read. I realized that reading wasn't just about memorizing words or improving my vocabulary. It was about experiencing the language in a way that speaking or writing alone couldn't provide. It allowed me to live inside the story, to understand the emotions of the characters, and to see the world from different viewpoints. One of the biggest turning points in my reading journey came when Mrs. Williams gave us a new book, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. At first, I was intimidated by the length of the book. It was much longer than anything I had read before, and the language seemed more complicated. I almost didn't want to read it, but Mrs. Williams encouraged me, saying, "Sometimes you have to challenge yourself. Don't worry if it seems difficult at first. The more you read, the easier it will become." I took her advice to heart and began reading the book slowly, one chapter at a time. There were moments when I had to reread certain passages because I didn't understand everything the first time. But with each chapter, I began to feel more comfortable. The characters became familiar to me, and the story pulled me in. I loved the adventures of Tom and his friends. I laughed at their mischief and felt their fear during the moments of suspense. Even though there were words I didn't know, I could still follow the story because I understood the context. By the time I finished the book, something inside me had changed. Not only had I improved my reading skills, but I had also developed a deep appreciation for the stories that English could tell. Tom Sawyer had opened up a new world of literature to me. I realized that reading could take me anywhere, into the past, into fantasy worlds, and even into the minds of people from different cultures. After that, I became a more avid reader. Every free moment I had, I would pick up a book and read. I moved on to other books, each one offering new challenges and new rewards. I remember reading a book about animals in the wild, where I learned not just about the animals themselves, but also about how they lived and survived in nature. I read stories of faraway places, tales of courage and adventure, of friendship and loyalty. Each book I finished gave me a sense of accomplishment, and the more I read, the more confident I felt about my ability to understand English. Mrs. Williams also encouraged us to read aloud. She believed that reading out loud would help with our pronunciation and fluency. I remember being shy at first, but as I read the words out loud, I started to feel more comfortable with the rhythm of the language. I began to understand how sentences were structured in English, how words flowed together. I also realized that reading out loud helped me retain what I had read. When I spoke the words, they seemed to stay with me longer. As I progressed in my reading, I also discovered the joy of reading different genres. I started with adventure stories and moved on to mysteries and fairy tales. Each genre had its own charm, and each one taught me something new. Mysteries challenged me to think critically, while fairy tales sparked my imagination. But no matter what I read, I found that every book had the same effect on me. It made me feel more connected to the language and more excited about learning. Reading also taught me about different cultures. Through the stories I read, I learned about traditions, beliefs, and lifestyles from different parts of the world. I learned about the history of places I had never been, and I became curious about the world beyond my own experience. It made me realize that English was not just a language. It was a bridge to understanding people from all over the world. By the time I reached the end of my first year of learning English, I was reading books in English every day. I had gone from struggling to read simple words to devouring full-length novels. Every book I finished made me feel proud. And with each new book I started, I felt more confident in my abilities. I remember one particular afternoon when I was sitting by the window, reading a book about a young girl's journey to find her place in the world. As I read, I realized how far I had come. Not long ago, reading in English had been a daunting task, but now it felt natural. It felt like part of who I was. I had embraced reading, and through it, I had discovered a whole new world. A world where words weren't just things to memorize, but keys to unlocking stories, adventures, and connections. Looking back, I realized that reading was not just about improving my English. It was about learning to love the language. It taught me patience, curiosity, and persistence. It showed me that learning wasn't a race, but a journey. And as I continue to read, I know that there are always new stories to discover new words to learn, and new horizons to explore. Chapter 6: The Art of Writing. After I had become more comfortable with speaking and reading in English, I soon realized that writing was the next big step in my journey. It was one thing to speak the language, another to read it. But writing was different. Writing required me to construct sentences, to think carefully about how I expressed my ideas, and to make sure my words made sense on paper. It was both exciting and intimidating at the same time. At first, Mrs. Williams introduced writing in a simple way. She handed us notebooks and encouraged us to start by writing simple sentences about our daily lives. I remember feeling a little nervous at the thought of writing in English. My mind raced with questions. What if I make mistakes? What if my sentences are too simple? But Mrs. Williams reassured us, saying, "Writing is a way to express yourself. It doesn't have to be perfect right away. The important thing is to keep trying." We started with simple exercises. Mrs. Williams would ask us to write sentences about our family. I wrote, "My mother is kind. My father is strong. I have one brother." It felt easy at first, but I quickly realized that writing in English was more than just stringing words together. Each sentence had to be clear and make sense. I began to pay attention to how words were ordered in sentences, how to use correct punctuation, and how to form different tenses. One of the challenges I faced was learning to use the correct word order in English. In my native language, the structure of sentences was different, and it took some time to get used to the English sentence pattern. For example, in English, we say, "I eat lunch," while in my language, we might say it differently. It took some practice to get the word order right, but Mrs. Williams always reminded us that practice was key. As I became more confident with writing simple sentences, Mrs. Williams encouraged us to write about things that were important to us. One day, she asked us to write a short story. I was excited about the idea, but also nervous. What would I write about? I wasn't sure where to start, but then I remembered a story my grandmother used to tell me about a brave knight. I decided to write about him and his quest to rescue a dragon trapped in a cave. It wasn't a very long story, but it felt special to me. I wrote about how the knight faced many challenges, and in the end, he freed the dragon, becoming a hero in his village. When I handed in my story, I was nervous to see what Mrs. Williams would say. She smiled at me when she returned it and said, "This is a wonderful story, Selena. You've done a great job with your imagination and vocabulary. Keep writing, and you'll see your skills improve even more." Those words from Mrs. Williams meant so much to me. It wasn't just about writing a good story. It was about expressing myself, letting my thoughts flow onto the paper. It was about using English as a tool to share ideas. And in that moment, I realized how powerful writing could be. As the weeks passed, writing became an essential part of my English learning process. We were asked to write about different topics, from what we did on weekends to what we wanted to be when we grew up. Each time, I would focus on using new vocabulary and sentence structures. I learned how to write about my feelings, my hopes, and even my dreams. Writing allowed me to put my thoughts into words, and I found that the more I wrote, the easier it became to express myself in English. One of the things I loved most about writing was how it helped me organize my thoughts. In the beginning, I would struggle to write down what I wanted to say, often erasing and rewriting sentences multiple times. But over time, I learned to write first, without worrying too much about mistakes. I would get my ideas down on paper and then go back to revise and improve them. Mrs. Williams taught us the importance of editing and rewriting. "No one writes perfectly the first time," she said. "The first draft is just the beginning. You can always make it better." We also practiced writing letters. Mrs. Williams explained how letters could be a way to communicate with others, even if they were far away. I wrote my first letter in English to my cousin, who lived in another city. I told her about what I had been learning, about my family, and how excited I was to improve my English. At first, writing the letter was a bit challenging, but by the end, I felt so proud of what I had written. I was able to express myself in another language, and it felt like a big accomplishment. As we continued with our lessons, Mrs. Williams introduced us to more complex writing tasks. She encouraged us to write longer paragraphs and even essays. The more I practiced, the more I began to enjoy the process. Writing was no longer just an assignment. It became a way for me to communicate my ideas and creativity. I realized that writing could be a way to express not just facts, but emotions, thoughts, and experiences. One day, Mrs. Williams gave us a special assignment to write about a place we would love to visit. I decided to write about Paris, the City of Lights. I wrote about the Eiffel Tower, the beautiful streets, and the delicious food. It felt like I was painting a picture with words. Writing gave me the opportunity to describe things in great detail, to make the reader see what I was imagining. The more I wrote, the more I realized how much power language had to convey meaning. I could transport people to different places, make them feel emotions, and share experiences. all through words. By this time, writing in English had become an essential part of my daily life. I carried a small notebook with me everywhere, jotting down thoughts, phrases, or new words I learned. I started writing short stories during my free time and even kept a journal. Each entry was a new chance to practice my writing skills and learn something new. Writing became a habit, something I did every day, and with each day my skills improved. The most rewarding part of writing in English was how it gave me a deeper connection to the language. It wasn't just about writing correctly, it was about using the language to share my thoughts, to tell my stories, and to communicate in a way that felt natural. I no longer saw writing as a challenge, but as a tool to express myself. Mrs. Williams noticed my progress and often encouraged me with kind words. "Your writing has improved so much, Selena. You've learned how to express yourself clearly and creatively." These words of encouragement made me realize that writing wasn't just about grammar or vocabulary. It was about finding my voice in a new language, and that was an achievement I would never forget. Looking back, I see that writing in English was more than just a lesson in language. It was a lesson in self-expression. It taught me how to organize my thoughts, how to communicate clearly, and how to use language to connect with others. The art of writing opened new doors for me, allowing me to explore my creativity and share my experiences with the world. And as I continue to write, I know that each word I write brings me one step closer to becoming fluent, not just in the language, but in expressing who I am. Chapter 7: Learning Through Movies. As I continued to improve my English, I started to realize that learning wasn't confined to textbooks or the classroom. There was a whole new world of opportunities for language learning outside of school. One of the most exciting and fun ways I discovered to improve my English was through movies. It all began when Mrs. Williams, our teacher, mentioned how watching English movies could help us improve our listening skills. She told us that movies were not just for entertainment. They were a great way to hear how English was spoken in real-life situations. She encouraged us to watch movies with English subtitles so that we could read along and understand what was being said. At first, I wasn't sure how helpful it would be, but Mrs. Williams assured us that it would make a huge difference. The first movie I watched to practice my English was a classic, The Lion King. My parents and I decided to watch it together one evening. The movie was in English, but my parents were just as eager to see how much I could understand. As the opening scenes began, I was struck by how different it was from reading in a textbook. The words on the screen were alive, spoken by characters who laughed, cried, and shouted. I could hear the emotions in their voices, and the context of the movie helped me understand the meaning behind the words. At first, I found myself relying heavily on the subtitles. The words on the screen helped me connect the spoken English with the visuals, which made it easier to understand. I started noticing the rhythm of the language, the way sentences were formed, and how people spoke in different situations. For example, when Simba said, "I just can't wait to be king," I could hear the excitement and enthusiasm in his voice, and I could see how the animation showed his emotions. It wasn't just about the words. It was about how those words were used to express feelings, intentions, and ideas. But the more I watched, the more I began to focus less on the subtitles and more on the spoken language. I realized that I was starting to pick up new vocabulary. I learned new phrases and expressions like "what's going on" and "you've got to be kidding me." These were things I never would have learned from a grammar book, but hearing them in context made them much easier to remember. I also noticed how the characters' voices varied depending on their emotions. When a character was excited, they spoke faster and with more energy. When they were sad, their voices slowed down and became softer. This helped me understand the importance of intonation, the rise and fall of the voice that gives meaning to a sentence beyond the words themselves. It wasn't just about what was being said, but how it was said. And as I watched more movies, I started to mimic these patterns in my own speech. I practiced saying phrases with the same tone, volume, and rhythm as the characters, which helped improve my pronunciation. Watching movies also exposed me to different accents and dialects of English. In The Lion King, the character's speech was clear and easy to understand. But in other movies, I began to hear different accents. In Harry Potter, the British accents of the characters were a bit more challenging for me to understand at first, especially when characters like Hagrid spoke. But this was a learning opportunity. I realized that there were many different ways to speak English, and hearing these accents helped me become more comfortable with understanding them. It was like stepping into a world where English wasn't just one language, it was a variety of voices, each with its own unique sound. After The Lion King, I started exploring other movies as well. I watched Finding Nemo, Toy Story, and even Shrek. With each new movie, I gained more exposure to different aspects of the language. Finding Nemo taught me words related to the ocean and sea creatures, while Toy Story introduced me to everyday vocabulary that I might not have learned in a classroom. For instance, the characters talked about getting the job done or being in charge, expressions that became part of my everyday vocabulary. But it wasn't just about learning new words. it was also about understanding culture. Many of the movies I watched had jokes and references that were part of the culture of English-speaking countries. For example, in Shrek, there were jokes that referenced fairy tales, and I had to understand the context to really get the humor. Watching these movies helped me understand the cultural context of English, and I learned that language isn't just words. It's shaped by the culture, history, and traditions of the people who speak it. As I continued watching movies in English, I started to notice a huge improvement in my ability to understand spoken English. I became better at picking up phrases, expressions, and even slang that I hadn't learned in class. I could now understand jokes in casual conversations, and this made me feel like I was becoming more fluent. It wasn't just about learning English. It was about living in it, experiencing it through the stories and characters that I loved. One of the best things about learning through movies was that it didn't feel like work. It was fun. I was watching movies that I enjoyed, and at the same time, I was improving my language skills. It made learning feel natural and effortless. Every time I watched a movie, I felt like I was taking a step closer to mastering English. It was as if I was living the language, not just studying it. I also started to pay attention to how I could use what I had learned in my own conversations. I would find myself using phrases or expressions from movies, like, "Let's get down to business," or "Don't give up." It felt great to be able to speak confidently in English, using the words I had learned from the characters I admired. I started to experiment with these phrases in real life, and over time, they became a natural part of my speech. Watching movies became a regular part of my English practice. I started setting aside time each week to watch at least one movie in English. Sometimes I would watch it twice, once with subtitles and once without, to test how much I had learned. I would also pause the movie at times to look up new words or phrases that I didn't understand. It became a fun routine, one that I looked forward to, because each movie was like a new lesson, a new adventure in learning. As I progressed in my studies, I found that I could watch even more complex movies without needing subtitles. I began watching news programs, documentaries, and TV shows in English. These were more challenging, but they also helped me learn more formal language, improve my listening comprehension, and expand my vocabulary. I realized that movies were just the beginning. They had opened the door to a much wider world of English. By this point, I had learned so much from movies. Not just new words and phrases, but also how to use them in different situations, how to understand different accents, and how to appreciate the cultural context of the language. Movies had made learning English feel exciting and alive. They had taken me out of the classroom and into a world where English was everywhere. And in that world, I was no longer just a learner. I was becoming a part of the conversation, part of the story. Chapter 8: Making Friends with English Speakers. As I continued to learn English, I started to realize that there was a crucial aspect of language learning that I had been neglecting: speaking with real people. Up until that point, my practice had been mostly through books, movies, and exercises in class. While these were essential in building my vocabulary and understanding grammar, I knew that to truly become fluent, I needed to interact with others, especially native English speakers. It wasn't long before an exciting opportunity arose. My school was hosting an exchange program with students from English-speaking countries. A group of students from the United Kingdom was visiting our school, and they would be staying with local families for a week. When I heard about this program, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was my chance to practice English in real-life situations with people who spoke the language every day. But at the same time, I was worried. What if I made a mistake? What if I couldn't understand them? I remember the day my new friend, Emma, arrived at our house. She was from London, and she had this bright, cheerful personality that immediately put me at ease. Emma was about my age, and she had a natural curiosity about life in my country. As soon as we met, we smiled at each other, but I could tell that both of us were a bit nervous. She spoke slowly at first, probably to make sure I understood her, and I tried to do the same. We introduced ourselves, and she asked me about my favorite hobbies, my family, and my school. The first few moments of conversation were a bit awkward. I wasn't used to speaking English with someone I had just met, and I struggled a little to find the right words. But Emma was kind and patient. She encouraged me to speak, even when I stumbled over my words. "Don't worry, Selena," she said. "I'm here to help you, and I'll make sure you feel comfortable." Her words made me feel safe, and that helped me relax. Over the next few days, Emma and I spent a lot of time together. We explored the town, visited local landmarks, and even cooked dinner together. Every activity was an opportunity for me to practice English in a natural setting. At first, I found it difficult to understand everything she said. Emma spoke quickly, and sometimes I had to ask her to repeat herself. But she was always patient, slowing down when needed, and explaining things if I didn't understand. What really helped me was that Emma didn't treat me like a student. She treated me like a friend, and we spoke casually, just like friends would. She told me about her life in England, the food she ate, the places she visited, and the things she enjoyed doing. She also asked me about my experiences and listened attentively as I tried to express myself in English. Even though my sentences were often simple and not perfect, Emma never made me feel self-conscious. She encouraged me to keep talking, and gradually my confidence began to grow. One of the most memorable moments of our time together was when we decided to go to the park. We walked along the river, chatting about our favorite books and movies. Emma told me about a popular British author, J.K. Rowling, and how much she loved the Harry Potter series. I hadn't read the books yet, but Emma was so passionate about them that I decided to give it a try. She recommended a few books, and we spent the whole afternoon talking about our favorite characters and stories. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was studying English. I was simply having a conversation with a friend. The more we talked, the easier it became to express myself. Over time, I realized that making friends with English speakers was one of the best ways to improve my language skills. Through these conversations, I not only learned new words and expressions, but I also learned how to use them in context. I discovered that language wasn't just about memorizing vocabulary. It was about using that vocabulary to connect with others. Emma taught me how to express myself more naturally, how to ask questions, and how to share my thoughts in a way that felt comfortable. What surprised me the most was how much I learned about the culture of English-speaking countries. Emma didn't just teach me words. She taught me how the language was used in different social situations. For example, I learned how people in the UK greet each other casually with "Hi there," or how they use phrases like "cheers" to thank someone. These little cultural nuances made me realize that language and culture are closely tied together. The way we speak is influenced by our environment, our traditions, and our way of life. One of the challenges I faced during our time together was understanding slang. Emma would occasionally use phrases like, "That's wicked," or "You're brilliant." I didn't know what they meant at first, but she was more than happy to explain. She told me that wicked was another way to say cool or awesome, and brilliant was a compliment, meaning excellent or amazing. These slang terms made our conversations even more fun and dynamic, and I realized that English wasn't just a formal language. It was a living, breathing thing that evolved over time. Spending time with Emma helped me develop more confidence in speaking English. I began to realize that making mistakes was okay. When I used a word incorrectly, Emma would gently correct me and explain the right way to say it. She didn't judge me or laugh at my mistakes. Instead, she saw them as opportunities for growth. And with each correction, I became better at expressing myself. By the end of the week, Emma and I had become close friends. We had shared stories, experiences, and laughs, all while practicing English. When it was time for her to leave, I felt a little sad, but I was also incredibly grateful for the experience. Not only had I improved my English, but I had also made a lifelong friend. Emma had shown me that learning English wasn't just about studying grammar and vocabulary. It was about building connections, understanding others, and sharing experiences. Through our friendship, I had learned more about language than I ever could have from a textbook. After Emma left, I continued to practice speaking English with other friends and classmates. I learned that the more I spoke, the easier it became. I started making more friends who spoke English, and I realized that it didn't matter if I made mistakes. What mattered was the connection I made through the language. Every conversation was a chance to practice, to learn, and to grow. Looking back, I realized that making friends with English speakers was one of the best things I could have done to improve my language skills. It wasn't just about learning to speak English. It was about living the language, feeling the language, and using it to connect with the world. And as I continue to make new friends and practice speaking, I know that each conversation brings me one step closer to becoming fluent. Chapter 9: The Power of Writing Letters. As I continued my English learning journey, I began to realize that one of the most powerful tools I had for improving my language skills was something I had never really considered before: writing letters. I had been focusing so much on speaking, reading, and watching movies, but writing letters turned out to be an incredibly valuable and rewarding experience that helped me not only practice my writing, but also connect with others on a deeper level. The idea of writing letters in English first came to me when Mrs. Williams introduced a new activity in class. She asked us to write a letter to someone, anyone, as long as it was in English. At first, I wasn't sure who I would write to. I had never written a letter in English before, and the idea seemed a little intimidating. But Mrs. Williams encouraged us, explaining how letter writing was a great way to practice our writing skills, and how it helped us develop our ability to express our thoughts in a more organized and meaningful way. I thought about who I could write to, and then it hit me. I could write to Emma, the friend I had made through the school exchange program. Emma and I had become close during her visit, and even though she had returned to London, I still thought about her often. I missed our long conversations, and I thought that writing her a letter would be a perfect way to stay in touch, while also practicing my English. The moment I decided to write to Emma, a wave of excitement and nervousness washed over me. I had so many things to say to her. Stories about my family, my school, and the new things I had learned. But at the same time, I was worried about making mistakes. What if I didn't know how to express myself well? What if I made a lot of errors in grammar or spelling? But then I remembered something Mrs. Williams had said. The important thing is to just start. Don't worry about making mistakes. Writing letters is a way to communicate your ideas, and the more you write, the better you will get. This advice stuck with me, and it gave me the confidence I needed to begin. I took out a piece of paper, grabbed my pen, and began writing. At first, it was slow. I wrote a greeting, "Dear Emma," and then I started telling her about what had been happening in my life. I wrote about the books I had been reading, the new words I had learned, and how much I had enjoyed our time together. As I wrote, I found that the words started to flow more easily. I didn't have to worry about speaking perfectly. This was writing, and I could take my time to think about what I wanted to say. What surprised me the most as I wrote was how much I enjoyed it. Writing a letter felt like having a conversation with someone, only I could take my time to choose the right words. It felt intimate and personal, a way to share my thoughts without any interruptions. I could express myself fully without the pressure of speaking in front of someone or worrying about making mistakes. It was just me, my thoughts, and the paper. As I continued, I realized that writing letters wasn't just about communicating. It was about reflecting. Every letter I wrote allowed me to stop and think about what was important to me. It helped me organize my thoughts, and in doing so, it made me more thoughtful and intentional in the way I expressed myself. I was able to look back on my experiences and share them in a way that felt meaningful. It was as if writing was helping me understand myself better. When I finished the letter, I was proud of what I had written. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. The most important thing was that I had shared a part of myself with Emma. I addressed the envelope, carefully wrote her address on it, and sent the letter off. The feeling of sending that letter was one of excitement. I couldn't wait to hear back from her. A few weeks later, Emma's letter arrived. When I opened the envelope, I felt a rush of happiness. As I read her words, I realized how much I had learned through the process of writing my letter. Emma's letter was full of warmth and kindness, and she told me about her life in London, what she had been doing since we last saw each other, and how much she missed our time together. It was like getting a piece of her world, a world I was learning about through her words. Reading Emma's letter also showed me how much my English had improved. I was able to understand everything she wrote without needing to look up too many words. I could see that the more I practiced, the better I became at understanding and expressing myself in English. I wrote her back right away, excited to continue our exchange of letters. As I wrote more letters over the months, I began to feel more comfortable expressing myself in English. Each letter became a practice ground for new vocabulary and expressions I had learned. I started experimenting with different ways of saying things, finding new ways to structure my sentences, and using more complex language. Writing letters gave me the freedom to experiment, to make mistakes, and to learn from them in a low-pressure environment. The best part was that writing letters didn't just help me with my language skills. It also helped me build a deeper connection with the people I wrote to. It wasn't just about the words I was writing. It was about the bond we were creating through those words. When I wrote to Emma, I wasn't just writing to practice English. I was sharing my life with her, hearing about hers, and creating a relationship that went beyond simple conversation. Soon, I started writing letters to other people as well. I wrote to my cousins, my friends, and even my teachers. Each letter I wrote was a chance to practice, but it was also a chance to connect. Writing became a part of my daily life. It was no longer just an assignment or a lesson. It was a way for me to express myself, to share my thoughts, and to build relationships. Through letter writing, I also started to appreciate the power of language in ways I hadn't before. I realized that words could carry so much meaning. They could comfort, inspire, and connect people in ways that nothing else could. A letter was more than just a piece of paper. It was a bridge between two people, a way to share experiences, ideas, and emotions. Writing letters taught me how to communicate my feelings and thoughts in a way that felt personal and heartfelt. Looking back, I realized that writing letters was one of the most valuable parts of my language learning journey. It taught me to slow down and think carefully about how I wanted to express myself. It helped me develop my writing skills, and it gave me a sense of confidence in using English to communicate in a meaningful way. More importantly, it reminded me of the power of connection, the way language can bring us closer together, even when we are miles apart. So, if you are learning a language, I highly recommend writing letters. Whether you write to a friend, a family member, or even a pen pal, it's an opportunity to practice your language skills while creating something meaningful. Through letters, you'll not only improve your writing, but also build connections that will last a lifetime. Chapter 10. Using English Every Day. As my journey with learning English progressed, I realized something incredibly important. Knowing English wasn't enough on its own. To truly master the language, I had to use it every day. I had learned a lot from books, movies, and lessons, but the key to truly becoming fluent was practicing the language in my everyday life. At first, the idea seemed a bit daunting. How would I incorporate English into my daily routine? How would I use it in a natural, effortless way? But as I soon discovered, using English every day didn't require some grand plan. It wasn't about speaking perfect English at all times. It was about making the language a part of my life, using it when it felt right, and practicing it in situations where I would naturally encounter it. I began to realize that the best way to improve my English was by making it a part of everything I did, no matter how small or simple. One of the first things I did was to start using English at home. My parents were very supportive of my language learning journey, and they agreed to help me practice by incorporating English into our daily conversations. It started with small things, like using English to describe objects around the house. Every time I sat down to eat, my mother would say, "Please pass the salt," and I would reply, "Here you go, Mom." We would say simple phrases like, "Good morning," or "Have a great day," in English, and at first it felt a little strange. Speaking a foreign language in a place where I had always spoken my native language was a bit intimidating, but I pushed through. The more we used English at home, the more natural it became. It was like we were building a new habit together. I started to feel more comfortable speaking in English with my family, and it didn't feel forced anymore. Whether I was asking for a glass of water or telling my mother about my day, I began to speak English without thinking too much about it. This daily practice helped me internalize the language. I wasn't just memorizing phrases. I was learning how to communicate in real-life situations in the same way that native English speakers would. One evening, as I was sitting with my parents at the dinner table, I realized something. I had just had a conversation in English, and it felt completely natural. I was talking about the book I had been reading in school, and my parents were asking me questions about it, all in English. It wasn't forced. It wasn't rehearsed. I was simply expressing myself in English, just like I would in my own language. That moment was a breakthrough. I realized that using English every day wasn't just about practicing. It was about living the language, allowing it to become a part of me, like a second nature. The next step was to practice English outside the home. I started by using it. When I went to the market with my mother, I'd greet the shopkeeper with a polite, "Good afternoon," and ask for the things we needed, like, "Can I have a loaf of bread, please?" Or, "How much is this?" At first, it felt awkward. I wasn't used to speaking English with people outside my family, and the shopkeepers would often look at me with surprise. But they were always friendly, and most of the time they would respond in English, helping me practice even more. One day, I asked a shopkeeper how to say a phrase correctly, and she patiently corrected me. It's, "How much is this?" Not, "How much this is." I was grateful for the correction, and it motivated me to keep practicing. The more I used English at the market, the easier it became to ask for what I needed and to speak naturally. I realized that using English in daily life didn't need to be perfect. It just had to be consistent. I also started making it a point to use English when talking to my friends. At first, we would switch between languages during our conversations, speaking in my native language most of the time and using English when we could. But as I grew more confident, I began using more English in our discussions. Whether we were talking about school, hobbies, or our favorite movies, I would ask questions in English, and I noticed that my friends started doing the same. We were practicing together without even realizing it. Soon enough, we were having full conversations in English, and it felt completely normal. At school, I started participating more in class discussions. I would raise my hand to answer questions in English, even though it was sometimes intimidating. But every time I did, I felt a sense of pride. Even if I made a mistake, I knew that I was improving. Mrs. Williams always encouraged us to use English as much as possible, and her support helped me feel more comfortable. "Don't worry about making mistakes," she would say. "The more you speak, the better you get. Practice is everything." I also discovered that reading in English every day helped me improve in ways I hadn't expected. I began reading short articles online, especially about topics that interested me, like technology and science. Every article I read exposed me to new vocabulary and expressions. Sometimes I would read a passage aloud to practice pronunciation, and other times I would underline words I didn't know and look them up. It wasn't just about reading for information. It was about building my English skills by immersing myself in the language. Even when I was out with friends or running errands, I made a point to listen for English whenever I could. I listened to English language music, podcasts, and even radio stations. When I couldn't understand something, I would pause and look up the words or phrases I had missed. Slowly, my ear became more attuned to the language, and I started to pick up new expressions and idioms that I had never encountered before. I realized that the more I exposed myself to English, the more fluent I became. One of my favorite ways to practice English was through watching TV shows and YouTube videos in English. I began watching shows that were both entertaining and educational, like nature documentaries or cooking tutorials. I would watch them with English subtitles so I could follow along more easily. And then I would challenge myself by watching the same video again, this time without the subtitles. It was amazing how much my comprehension improved, and how I started recognizing patterns in the way sentences were structured. Using English every day also gave me the confidence to try new things. I started participating in online forums and discussions where I could write about topics I was passionate about, like books and music. At first, I was hesitant to post anything because I was afraid of making mistakes in writing, but over time, I realized that the more I posted, the better I became at expressing my thoughts in written English. I would even reply to comments in English, which further helped me improve my language skills. Looking back, I realized that using English every day was the turning point in my language learning journey. It wasn't just about practicing in a classroom or reading books. It was about making English a natural part of my daily life. Whether I was talking to my family, shopping at the market, reading articles, or watching TV, I was constantly practicing. And with each day, I grew more confident, more fluent, and more comfortable with the language. I learned that the key to mastering any language is consistency. It's not about studying for hours at a time. It's about using the language every day, even in small ways. Whether it's asking for directions, making a new friend, or just watching a TV show, every opportunity to use English is an opportunity to improve. And as I continue to use English every day, I know that I'm building a strong foundation for lifelong learning. Great work today! Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.